All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody, for another conveyor meetup here today. So we've got Noel O'Connor joining us today as a presenter to talk to us on the Pathfinder and how to assess your apps for containerization using this tool. So just real quick before we get started, we will be running some polls. So throughout the event, so check out the polls section as you go. Please use the Q&A to ask your questions. We've got Miguel, Perez, Colino who will be answering some questions during the session. If we don't get to them during the session, we could certainly pick them up afterwards. Noel, if you go to the next slide, just want to invite you all again to go to konveyor.io or konveyor.github.io, either one. And if you click on forum and then join group, you'll continue to receive these invitations. Right now, we're hitting a couple of mailing lists, but over time, we're going to kind of concentrate on just the mailing list and the Konveyor community over time for these meetups. So if you want to continue to receive them, please go there. We'd also welcome you to join us on Konveyor on Kubernetes Slack to continue the conversation and speak with any of the developers and engineers working in the community. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Noel for today's session.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, great.
All right, perfect. Hi, my name is Noel O'Connor. I'm a senior principal architect in the EMEA solutions practice here in Ireland, well, Red Hat EMEA. So today I'm going to talk about Pathfinder and the use cases we've used it for, and basically what the purposes and how customers have been using it. So the background to this is that when customers start looking at container platforms, be they OpenShift or any other Kubernetes-based platform, we keep getting the questions, what do I need to consider when moving my application to containers? What aspects of my application do I need to consider, architectures, implementation, that type of stuff? What changes do I need to consider from my operational process? So how do I deploy? How do I test? How do I build? That type of stuff. And basically, what does good look like in a container platform? We've been asked this for years because there's, as much as there's, different Kubernetes distros, there's different types of applications all over the place, and a lot of customers are asking us how to move their applications onto Kubernetes. What they're looking for is does their application, what does good look like, and does it look good like in a container? So the purpose of Pathfinder was a Red Hat opinion on what applications could, and should not run in containers. What would we see that would stop applications running there? What would we see that would have impacts and require substantial changes to actually get these applications to run within them? We have used this literally around the world. I'll show an uptake map later, but basically it has been very useful to actually assess the applications and figure out what needs to change and literally what cannot change. There may be kind of significant structural impacts that containerization will not be able to solve. So the assessment areas, we cover quite a broad spectrum. The one thing that you'll notice here is basically we don't cover implementation languages. And it's not a low-level approach like let's scan the code and see what web services or DB calls you're using. We're looking at the kind of the cross-cutting concerns of an application, things like architectural suitability, dependencies, resiliency, communication, compliance, even down to things like legal compliance for outages and that type of stuff, state management, runtime profile, observability. I won't go through them all here. I'll take you through a demo of the application later, and you can see the questions that are actually posed. So the assessment tool, it is literally, it's a very straightforward three-tier application running a UI, basically that has a MongoDB in the back end and just a kind of web service tier in the middle. It's just simple login, basically create applications on there, then go into a kind of an assessment. And from the assessment, once all the questions are answered, basically go down to review. So in the review, you make a decision. You see what's good, bad, ugly, and indifferent in a lot of the questions. You see the kind of pie chart here that we'll go through later. And you make decisions like what do you want to do from do we want to rehost, do we want to replatform, retire, that type of stuff, and also things like business criticality and work priority, as well as effort estimates. You go from that, and if you do enough of them, you can end up with some sort of map that shows what applications you should consider first, and basically what applications you shouldn't touch. Oops, wrong way. And eventually come up with a kind of a gauge that just tells you what we think, or at a high level, what is cloud native, what is modernizable, and basically what shouldn't be touched. As I said before, Pathfinder is a Red Hat opinion. It's a strong Red Hat opinion as what good looks in containers. It's also an opinion of where you should start first. So basically, a lot of times we're asked by customers, great, I have these 100 applications, but which one should I do first? And things like the dependency graph that you can see here can sometimes address that, at least give something to consider as a starting point. And so with that, good news, it's not going to be slideware all day, even though I said I'd do it for 20 minutes. So I'll take you through a demo of Pathfinder itself. We have one hosted up on employee OpenShift in Red Hat, so I'll just quickly log into this. So you see here, this is basically just a demo site. It is using data that we've got and desensitized, so there's no customer data inside here, and basically just we'll run through an assessment. So we have multiple example customers on here, everything from demo down to different banks, all that type of stuff. So basically we'll just go through this Pathfinder demo. Click on here. What you can do with this is, so you can simply add an application. There's two types of application. There's an application which you're going to assess, and there's an application which is dependency only. So things like a database, you're not going to assess a database. You're going to assume, that's as a dependency, but you're not going to actually try and containerize it, or maybe you are, but that would be a separate accessible application. So you click create, and it goes in down here. As you see, we now have six applications, and basically we just take the latest one, which is this one here. We click in and do the assessment, and hopefully my internet keeps up because it's been kind of slow this week. And it's getting there. There we go. Right. So there's roughly around 25 odd questions here across 5 pages. Excuse me. So basically, we'll quickly go through them. If you want to understand what the question is about, you can just mouse over the eye icon, and he'll give you more information on that. So we start off with the kind of meta stuff, like, is the application under active development, and does the team understand what the application is about? And we'll assume for this one it's a new greenfield application. You'll see the questions are in no particular order, but you'll see the outcome of the answers later. How is the application supporting production? Everything from literally third-party outsourcing all the way down to a pure DevOps model. So we'll say we're going to be a purist here. We're going to say it's going to be a pure DevOps model. How long does it take from the code is committed to deployed in production? These are, as you're probably aware, these are the accelerate metrics. So good to know this type of stuff, especially future stuff that we'll be doing. Pathfinder will show changes over time. We'll say between 1 day and 1 week. Deployment frequency, multiple times per day. Mean time to recovery. Well, we haven't built it, so we'll say be less than an hour. This is one of the kind of gotcha questions here. Does the application have any legal compliance requirements? So things like PCI or HIPAA, or kind of if the application is a downtime, does need to be required to, is the company required to report it to some regulator? Also things like licensing requirements. As we spin things up in pods, if we start auto scaling, is that going to start eating licenses? Is that going to start application instances crashing due to license restrictions? So we'll assume, as we're being purist, we'll say none. What best describes the application architecture is everything from a massive monolith that can only vertically scale down to independent deployable components. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say unknown, because we haven't built it yet. So we just say, we try, but we'll leave this as unknown for the moment. And you can also add comments as you see fit. We go to page 2. So does the application require specific hardware capabilities to run? Everything from non-supported CPU requirements, let's say Spark or ARM or something more esoteric down to support the CPU x86 power, that type of stuff. And also things like, it doesn't require custom legacy hardware. Let's say, I don't know, some sort of serial boards or that type of stuff, or GPUs. So we'll say we're going to do something fancy, we'll leave it at GPUs. Operating system, what operating system does the application require? Everything from standard Linux, being for Red Hat, that should be pretty obvious, or anything down to non-supported, let's say OS 10 or AIX. We'll leave it at that. Windows is also in here as well, because basically Windows now is capable of running containers. So this question 11 is probably one of the most important things from a gotcha perspective, is if you're using third-party components or vendor components, are they actually supporting containers? Because we see a lot of customers actually saying, oh, I'm going to take a base image and I'm going to install this third-party component and I'm going to put it on a Kubernetes platform and basically run it from there, but they end up being unsupported by the vendor because they haven't either considered containerization or it's a different product to be running containers. So this is one of the kind of the key gotchas people get stuck with quite a bit on. So we're going to say fully vendor supported with certified images. Dependencies. So unfortunately, dependencies have a bug at the moment, so it won't render particularly well. But I'll show you what I mean by dependencies. So we have everything. So this is incoming to the application. So northbound dependencies. So what from a custom profile view, what application before this application calls this application, if that makes logical sense. So we'll go with internal dependencies only. Now this is where you can add your different your databases and so forth. Well, it wouldn't be northbound being a database, but a southbound. But northbound thing would, let's say, be a web server or something like that. For northbound dependencies, you can say, right, we're just going to do a database. FTP. And this, as I say, there's a bug in this in a moment, so it won't render perfectly, but we'll see when we get to it. We click next. How resilient is the application? How well does it recover from outages and restarts? This is something we see a lot with older, kind of more legacy applications, which, if the application has downtime, you need to go in and kind of clean up a transaction log or something like that. So you're asking the developers, like, if we put this into a container, into a pod, if we move the pods around the place, let's say during a node upgrade or something like that, basically, will that cause issues? Thankfully, given this is new, we're going to say we're going to do circuit breakers and retries and all that type of stuff. Obviously, what I'd love to see is things like case engineering, but that's not often seen. It does happen occasionally, but it's kind of more aspirational. How does the external world communicate with the platform? I mean, so Kubernetes primarily is TCP/IP. You can use node ports, you can use that type of stuff, but things like serial protocols or Apple Talk or IPX, obviously that's going to work over TCP/IP, as well as things like traffic with host addressing like SSH. So we're just going to say HTTP traffic. Internal state. This is not how does the database, does the application write to a database? It's more around, does the application have some sort of internal application state that needs to be managed? So things like Zookeeper or Datagrader, that type of stuff. Or if you're doing shared storage or a shared disk between application instances, you can even do shared memory between components in a pod if you need. But the more esoteric, the harder it is to kind of get working seamlessly. So we're going to say ephemeral. Service discovery, stuff we've seen in as once again in older kind of legacy systems, is thing like to set up an application instance, you have to register the application instance in a database with the host name and some sort of key and some sort of port. That kind of hard coding to IP address obviously doesn't work really well in a container platform, specifically when you have dynamic IP addresses associated. So usually it could be anything from literally custom cluster managers all the way down to standard name resolution in DNS. We explicitly call on here kind of required libraries like HashiCorp Console, Netflix, or Eureka. Not there's anything wrong with those approaches. It's just more, it's a layer on top of Kubernetes name resolution, so it's another thing to manage and another component to have working. But it's just explicitly calling it out, so we're going to say standard. How's the application clustered? Everything from static clusters down to Kubernetes discovery, but we're not going to need anything here. We go next. So this is the observability approach, basically. So how do we do logging? We're going to say, everything from no logging down to standard out. So we're going to say standard out. Does the application provide metrics? Sometimes we see, once again, more common off-the-shelf applications will provide metrics, but basically they'll provide it in some sort of really kind of unique manner, be it streaming over TCP socket or something else. A lot of times a lot of older stuff uses a lot of SNMP. But you can also put in like third-party metric solutions like Dynatrace or AppDynamics. So we'd say, we'll put in AppDynamics or Dynatrace. Liveness probes. So the application help liveness and readiness probes. Two things here is basically, what we see a lot with customers is basically a lot of people use the same endpoint for liveness and readiness. I personally consider that, as is Pathfinder, kind of not a good practice because the two probes are semantically different. So basically, given that we're building this from scratch, we're going to say dedicated independent liveness and readiness probes. Of course, synthetic transactions would also be useful, but that's a bigger thing to engage with. So application runtime characteristics. This is kind of what does the application look like when it's running? Is it doing, things like latency sensitive application like voice or high frequency trading, or is basically going to be something like intermittent traffic with predictable CPU needs? This is kind of very generic in the sense that usually the best type of application in general for a container platform is deterministic with CPU and memory and that type of usage. But we have different customers doing different things, and across the spectrum of things here. So we put down as constant traffic. How long does it take to the application ready to handle traffic? So this is a reasonably new question we asked, and the reason we asked this question is that people think of their application at the moment that's always up and running. So it's sitting up there and basically, it's constantly just humming away, sometimes serving traffic, sometimes not. And one of the big things we see for applications starting up or instance starting up is basically, can it be ready in under 10 seconds? Or is it things like every 5 minutes or to start up? Because one of the things you can consider with Kubernetes platforms is using Knative to do Knative servering for a kind of a serverless approach. So these two questions here, the runtime characteristics and how long the applications can be ready to handle traffic, are kind of allow you to consider, would this application be suitable for containerization and also for putting into a kind of a Knative delivery model. So we'll say, we'll do 10 seconds, but less than a minute. Next, this last page. So application testing undergoing. So basically, the rationale behind this is that, you put something in a container, how are you going to test if it's actually going to work? Is it going to be manual automated testing, or is it going to be, literally you click on a button and you kind of manually go through it? So everything kind of covered here from basically, once again, case engineering down to none whatsoever. I'm going to mark this as unknown because we're not sure. Now you'll see the unknown, the reason for unknown later on. How is the application configured? Colleagues of mine are on this call, and we spent a couple of days in Germany last year assessing applications that were looking to be put on OpenShift. And basically, the reason the application couldn't be put on into containers was to install the application, you had to install it first. Then you have to edit the configuration files, and then you have to reinstall it again using the new configuration files for each environment. So configuration is sometimes a missed aspect to containerization. You can add stuff via UIs and all that, but in a dynamic platform where as a container platform, the easiest part where you can load things via config maps or secrets, or even things like Spring Cloud Server or HashiCorp Console, are far more applicable than basically reinstalling with config files every time. We'll leave this as the variables. So 31 was about security. Now, obviously, with security is a very broad aspect to containerization. The only question we ask here, because we'd have hundreds of questions if we were go into security in depth, was literally how do you get your credentials? How do you get the kind of the certificates or the passwords required to securely connect to other elements of a solution? So we're going to leave it just as loaded via files, secrets. How's the application currently deployed? Once again, this is related to the story I had about a German customer where basically it was manual documented steps, which is a nightmare for containers. Obviously, there's different levels, but let's say we're going to do GitOps for this application. And finally, where the last two is more meta information. Where is it currently the application currently deployed? We're going to say bare metal server for the moment, and how mature is the existing containerization process? This taps into the capability of the delivery team. If you're starting off with containers and you haven't really played with Kubernetes or containers before, that should be considered a risk, because there'll be lots of lessons to learn and lots of gotchas in the road going through. So we're going to say we are proficient. And then we complete it. So that's the assessment done. We go back here, and you see now that basically we have we assessed it? Yes, we have. There's 26 of 2 and /2. So the 2 are answers that we marked as unknown. Now we can go back in and re-edit this. I'm not going to do it here, but basically you can go back in and kind of change your answers as you see fit going through. But the next phase in the assessment approach is basically to review the output of the assessment. So we click on that, and this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So basically, we had no reds, which is good, which means that primarily for this application, the majority of questions answered what we consider was container native. There was no primary gotchas that were going to kind of come back and bite us. There was no stuff we could see that would inhibit this application moving into a container. There was one amber, and I can click on the amber here, and this was, does the application require specific hardware to run? So the answer here was GPU or specific node hardware requirements. That's not a gotcha in the sense that you can't use this application container. It's a gotcha around the things that you need to be aware of what is required for running it on Kubernetes. So there might be device manager plugins that you need to add in there to support the hardware you need. The gray is obviously where the 2 applications we didn't answer. So it's kind of, once again, you can go back and add to those. And obviously the green is basically everything else. We thought, yeah, it's all good. There's nothing here that kind of concerns us as such. The next bit then is kind of like what you want to do with it. So we'll go through these. The 6 R's are called rehost, replatform, repurchase, retain. So we're going to just say rehost for the moment. The effort estimate. So basically, how much effort do we think it would basically be to get this application into container? We're going to say medium. The business criticality was basically how critical is this application to the business? So basically, 1 is a kind of, it's a help page that's kind of useful, to 10 being, it's a payment processing system that, the business ends up going bankrupt if it's not running. So we're going to leave that as 3 for the moment. And the work priority. So the work priority was how eager are we as a customer to get started on this application. So it's kind of like a kind of, when do we want to start it? So we'll say we'll start at high, so it's high priority. Right, and you click up here and submit review. Right, so you see all this is done, and then so you see for this customer at the moment, you can click on the report, and this shows you the application in context with the other applications on at the customer. If it renders, and it renders nicely. Love that animation. So we're saying of the 6 applications at the moment, basically this demo is trivial but migratable. So basically this is the business impact. We said that this application had little business impact. The inadvisable are applications over here, which basically, this is a quadrant, by the way, in case you can't see it on the screen. Basically, down here is along the keep getting this wrong. Along this axis is confidence. How confident are we on basically getting this into containers? And up this axis is basically business criticality. So basically, when you're looking at this, you're saying, right, which applications should I go with first? And given this was a demo, and I'll show you more fully fledged output in a moment. Basically, everything here is saying, well, there's not really anything here that's impactful and migratable. There's this trivial but migratable, but you're not going to see much business value over here. You're going to see a lot of inadvisable stuff here. It's just not worth doing. And over this color here is basically about repurchasing. So for this application, which is app 2, we've decided rather than migrating it or deplatforming it, we're going to buy a new version. Same with this one up here, refactor. We're going to actually, rather than doing anything directly in a container, we're going to rebuild the application from scratch, re-architect it. So this is the kind of output that you can get through it. Also going down, there's a suggested adoption model. This makes a lot more sense when you have multiple applications all feeding into each other like a dependency. And these are the identified risks across all the applications. So things like non-CPU support requirements, app 1 and dummy application, great names, basically will have issues as such. So that's really it from a demo perspective. I will show you a kind of more bigger example as such with a lot more applications. This is kind of a bit overcooking it. I think I don't know how many applications we have now. We have a lot in here. So if we generate the port, this is what it looks like when you have a lot going on, and you also have dependencies between applications. So these applications up here are all retire, which is impactful and migratable seemingly. Well, basically the one you'd start with off first is this app portal, consumer app portal, probably the first cab off the rank. But this is what it looks like when you have a lot of applications and have a lot of dependencies. Right. So that's the end of that. So let's go back to the slides. Where was it? All right. So as part of the review process, the 6 R's, as it's known in the industry, is basically, retain, retire, rehost, replatform, refactor, repurchase. The effort and risk is always higher on the repurchase because you're putting something new into an existing solution arena as such. Refactor is always risky as well because basically you have a lot of coding to do. Rehosting, lift and shift, so basically moving to a container as is, and replatform is basically maybe it isn't suitable for container and it might be suitable for maybe something like virtualization if it isn't already in virtualization. And with this as well, you can use things like OpenShift virtualization or KubeVirt to do that on a Kubernetes distro as you see fit. So with Pathfinder, we have a kind of a coarse grain tag associated for metrics tracking just to see where it's been deployed. And sorry, not deployed, see where it's being used as such. It doesn't go into any kind of higher grade detail than this. So these are the unique installations and usages of of Pathfinder in the last 30 days. So it's been used substantially around the world with different consulting teams from Red Hat and Red Hat partners. But it is open source as well. So I know of other organizations who are using this as well. So a couple of questions I keep getting asked. Can you add your own questions? Yes, you can. There's actually there's a JSON schema embedded and powers embedded in the server-side component of Pathfinder that allows you to add additional questions on top of the core 25 ones you've seen previously. So you can follow the link there. That'll take you on how to add your own questions. We actually have done this for multiple customers because they wanted to gather more information than what was in the core Pathfinder question set. Can you export the data? Yes, you can. There's an export functionality in the user interface. How much does it cost? Well, it's free, so knock yourself out. The only thing I would ask is follow the Creative Commons attribution license for the questions and answers. That's really the only thing we'd like people to adhere to. Everything else is, keep going as you see fit. Can you install it in Kubernetes? Yes, you can. Primarily my day-to-day platform is OpenShift, so I spend the majority of my time in either templates or Helm charts. I haven't tried it in pure upstream Kubernetes, but the only kind of real kind of gotcha potentially would be installing MongoDB. So if you get MongoDB, it should just pick it up seamlessly. And that's it. Any questions?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Noel. Thanks for presenting today. Prior to transitioning to Q&A, I did just drop a link in the chat to a Google survey. I would ask that you please fill that out. It helps us continually improve and ensure and get Noel feedback on whether or not his questions in Pathfinder are on target and so on and so forth. So I really appreciate you guys filling out that survey. Take a minute to do that, and with that, we could transition to Q&A. There was several questions in the chat that Miguel actually answered as you were speaking. Noel, I don't know if you're able to see them in your interface, but also one of the questions earlier, I can't remember who asked it at this point, but was around could you show the information bubble if you share your screen again and highlight the little info bubble next to the questions. Monica was asking what was actually provided in there.
Hopefully she's not spotting typos because there's probably lots. Okay. Right. Right. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. So we'll go back in here, pop in demo. Oops, wrong one. Oh, but actually, that's a good one to go back into. Actually, while I'm here, so this is what happens when you got gotchas. You've got, oh yeah, we think this is going to suck. So primarily the first one there, as you click in each color, it comes up with the different gotchas. So basically, the first one is first cab off the rank is basically not third-party vendor components, not recommended to run in a container platform. So stuff like that we call out that is really kind of people don't necessarily think of day one. They'll find out in day two, definitely.
Yeah, no, I think
stuff like that is useful.
Yeah, just to be clear, I think it was under the question. If you go to the question area.
Yeah, no. I wanted to call that out. Yeah, absolutely. I just want to show the colors is there. So I'll go in here and I'll click on edit. So yeah. Can you see that?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So it just gives you a little tooltip with what a little more detail.
Yeah, it's just tooltip. Yeah. So all of this, like this is all in the question metadata inside there. So yeah, you can change that as you see fit. We have actually had a few people try to internationalize it. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell if it's good or bad because I don't speak the language. But like pull requests are always welcome if people want to do it.
Great.
Right.
Awesome. I'm trying to think if there's any other questions. I think it looks like we got to most of them in the Q&A. Let me just open up. Do the 6 Rs favor the other options above repurchase, COTS, SaaS? If so, how would you reconcile that ordering with common architectural principle of reuse before buy, before build?
No, there's no particular ordering. So in the slide, yes. So a lot of times we see people who are looking at legacy applications and basically decide, I'm going to upgrade to two versions ahead or whatever. Usually there's a lot of impact that has rather than just upgrading the current version. So a lot of the time we see, is it repurchase, he said, or in common reuse before build. Yeah. So repurchases, it might sound easier, but there's a lot of inherent risk in that. We see that a lot. Remember, a lot of these questions and a lot of the output is basically based on experience we've had with customers. So once again, everything is kind of at the granular level. Different customers, it might be seamless, it may not be, but in our experience, repurchasing comes with its own risk.
Great, thanks, Noel. So I think that's about it. Everything else looks like it got answered. I appreciate, again, a link to the survey was put into the chat. If you could click on that and take it. Other than that, I appreciate all you joining. We will post the slides and the meetup to the Konveyor.io page under meetup, so it's available for all of you later. And have a great rest of your day wherever you are and however close it is to ending. Thanks.
See you there. All right.